Good afternoon. I'm Danny Flexen. Welcome to Seconds Out Live. And I'm delighted to be joined by my good friend and Hall of... No, that's who we're going to be talking about today. In fact, I'm delighted to be joined by my good friend and lead reporter here at Seconds Out, Mr. Ayman Khan. Ayman, how the devil are you?
Well, I was about to turn around and I was wondering who you were announcing then, because I didn't think my name was coming on the end of that. But I'm great, Danny. All the better to be speaking to you, returning in the hot seat, and all the people waiting for the Seconds Out Live weekly episodes, and all the people who will be contributing, hitting the like and subscribing for this week's edition.
I thought I'd preempt all the trolls who start complaining, saying, "Well, you've got a big picture of Frank Warren on the thumbnail, so he must be on the show." He's at a press conference in Manchester, guys. You should know that if you've been watching the channel. He's there with Radio Raheem, Modfather Vinny. There's probably a few other people there as well. But what that means is we're very lucky this week on SO Live, because Modfather Vinny is up in Manchester. We're actually being guided along our rocky road by Modfather Frank, who happens to be the director of production here at Seconds Out. So very important man for a very important show. You might ask, why don't we have him every week in that case? But we don't want to throw any shade at Modfather Vinny in his absence, although that is the best time to do it. As you'll probably see from the thumbnail, we're going to be starting off in our first segment, as usual, talking about Frank Warren. And I'm not going to say a return to form, because thanks to Riyadh season and Tyson Fury, he has been in the ascendancy for the last couple of years. But now he has moved from TNT Sports. He's moved this whole stable over to DAZN, and they've decided to hit the ground running. 3 big shows announced this morning, and the press conference, as I mentioned just now, in Manchester, to talk about the first show that will be at the Co-op Arena, Co-op Live. And we'll get into all of that. But let's quickly go to the chat before we do. Please do remember, we are the most interactive show on boxing YouTube. We would appreciate you giving us a thumbs up, and subscribe if you haven't already, and do get all your chats, comments, questions in, and we'll get through as many of those as we can in our allotted time, which is pretty much as long as we want. Topentine, and this is pretty brutal, I read this before we came on, says, if it's Fury, because our headline on the thumbnail was Guess Who's Back, if it's Fury, he can stay retired. Boxing world don't want him. He can die with some effing dignity, which is obviously a quote, but it's not Fury, as far as we're aware, although Fury is going to make a big announcement on his future shortly, according to Frank Warren at the press conference today. But no, we're talking about Frank Warren. He's back in the ascendancy. He's back on DAZN. He wasn't on DAZN before, although some of the Riyadh season shows have been on DAZN. So technically, you could call it a return. DB Cooper 1 says, what time do you call this? Modfather Frank, Vinny, just how many people have you got on the payroll? G's. Is that a G's or is that a G's, like Craig Richards? Must be a money laundering op. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying no channels in history have ever done anything in that regard, but we certainly haven't. So, no, you're looking in the wrong place. Martin Mulligan, welcome today, says, afternoon, boys. Looking forward to the live. See, that's more respectful. That's more affectionate, more endearing than DB Cooper 1. You could learn a thing or two from Eminem, Martin Mulligan. But yes, we are talking predominantly about the shows that Frank Warren announced. Well, not personally, he didn't announce it himself, but came out over the email this morning. One in Manchester, that's the first one up. Then Nottingham, then Glasgow. Really good, intriguing fights all round, I'd say. But Ayman, what's your pick of the bunch across the 3 shows?
Probably Lee Wood versus Kakachi. I think they've all got intrigue and they've all got their own. They all hold interest in their own merit, especially as well. Josh Taylor's return to the ring. There's a lot of question marks around him moving up to welterweight, and it being Echo Esselman being your first step into welterweight, which is no easy task at all for the back of 2 contenders for Fight of the Year, at least on the domestic scene. So that's a tough challenge for Josh Taylor, who a lot are wondering how much he's got left in the tank. I mentioned there previously about Kakachi and Lee Wood, or Lee Wood and Kakachi. That's Lee Wood's long-awaited return to the ring, and he's signed with Queensberry Promotions and back in at Nottingham. And he's got a lot of history, of course, in Nottingham, but also a lot of history with the Irish in Nottingham, having fought Mick Conlan in what was a brutal and stunning affair at the start and at the end of the fight. And I expect very much the same sort of type of fireworks on that night. And then this launch one with heavyweights, I think is a real hallmark of what Frank Warren is looking to achieve. When I looked at this card, I thought, should I be comparing this to Eddie Hearn and what he's offered in the UK? Yeah, sure. Do I think this is a good, solid start and maybe better than what Hearn's offering at the moment in the UK? I think Probably, yeah. Do I think this is a better launch than how Eddie Hearn launched DAZN with his first card? And I debated this one a little bit. I'm not too sure that Liam Smith versus Anthony Fowler card, which featured the likes of Ted Cheeseman versus Troy Williamson, Kieran Conway was in against JJ Metcalf, I believe, and I think Shannon Courtney, was that the night that she got upset? Was it Rachel Ball?
I think so.
No, it was Jamie Mitchell.
Oh,
Jamie Mitchell. I'm kind of wondering, like, can't quite fully fledge out the comparison just yet because the card's not complete, but it's a very strong start to say that Frank Warren's, and of course the jeopardy of it being the heavyweights and the name recognition on both sides. I think Frank's got a real strong calling to say he's really putting his mark down on DAZN as to the competition, not the friendliness and working together. He mentioned in the interview, the sit down I did at his office, that this is competition, and he's put a big, strong flag in the ground to say that he's going to be the one, or wanting to be the one that's the lead promoter at DAZN with this launch offering. So I think it's a good set of fights. Riakporhe and Akoli reigniting their rivalry at heavyweight this time round. I wonder what that does for Riakporhe moving up to heavyweight against Lawrence Akoli, who's just stepped his foot in there and looked for what a lot of people have said for a long time, that he'd be very much at home at heavyweight. And then Joyce versus White, I think, is a really, really good clash in prospect. And I would put, as I put out Twitter, am I wrong in thinking that Joyce stands to be the favourite, although he lost to Derek Chisora? Maybe that's not too bad.
Surely not. Surely
I don't know. I don't know. I can't, as much as I maybe called Wallen and Chisora and Wallen wrong, off of the back of Dylan White versus Ebenezer Tete, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, White looked laboured, but he'd been out the ring for a long time. Joyce hasn't looked good for quite a while. And against the lower level of opposition, perhaps, as well. You know, I've been quite vocal in the fact that I feel Joyce, it's time for him to retire. That same may be true of Dillian White. I need to see more of him. I don't think we saw enough against Tete. We need to see him against a proper opponent. But yeah, for me, I would make White a solid favourite, but maybe the bookmakers will disagree.
Yeah, I mean, if you want me to go into my prediction now for that fight, I can
Go on
do.
then, yeah.
Yeah, so I just, in my head, when I lay out the land for this fight, I just think Joyce, whatever he does, is he always puts pressure on you, and he always depletes the gas tank of the opponent. And that was when I picked my pick for Chisora versus Wallen, thinking it'd be Wallen, it was because I couldn't get the image of Chisora running around the ring in that final few minutes to get out of the way of Joyce, even though he'd dropped him a couple of times. I couldn't get that out of my mind. And I thought a fitter and durable and maybe an ambitious Otto Wallen might have been able to do something a little bit more. We'll talk about that later on in our future segment.
Yeah, but I was very disappointed with Wallen.
Me too. But Joyce, I think he still has that. Even if maybe the chin isn't as strong as it once was, he's still a good front foot fighter and someone who can take a shot and deliver it. Questions might be as to whether he should be taking those shots and coming back with it, but he's in the ring. He's made that choice to continue. I just wonder if Dylan White's left hook is as potent as it once was. Maybe the age and the wear and tears is driving down Dylan from where he was once at the top table or somewhere near around that. I think his powers at the top are a lot more to question than what Joyce has got left in the tank. So that's why I make Joyce the favourite for the moment.
Right, now I'll go into my feedback on the schedule in a moment, but I want to get the poll up nice and early. I mean, we weren't nice and early, so the poll might as well be. So we're asking you, which was the best fight announced in Frank Warren's schedule today? Was it Dillian White against Joe Joyce? Was it Anthony Kakachi defending his super featherweight world title against former featherweight champ Lee Wood? Was it Lee McGregor against Nate Collins, which I think is a real underrated, potentially banger? Or other? And if you do pick other, please comment in the chat which fight you think will be the best that's not on our list. Modfather Frank, if you can whack that up, we would really appreciate it. Zambanu Love says, disappointed Bricktop's giving White another payday. He's had about the same number of PPVs than tests he's failed. I mean, are you including other tests in that? Because White has had quite a few pay-per-views. Are you including, maths tests, spelling tests? Who knows? I think we know the type of test you are referring to. Zambanu Love says either Shannon loss makes Eddie's card better. Oh, yeah. I think he means like Shannon Courtney's any Shannon's lost, maybe. Shannon Ryan, Shannon Courtney. DB Coupon says Turkey/Riyadh season changed Frank's entire fortune. He kept the £3 million fighters bonus. Well, he's never confirmed that he kept it, and reinvested into his stable for the first time ever, paying off. Martin Mulligan says Kakachi Wood will be a war. Great fight. Thunder Road. Thanks, Thunder Road. The magic of the FA Cup has killed Danny's quadruple talk. Big up Plymouth Argyle. Yeah, I mean, that didn't make a lot of happy faces in the Flexen household yesterday, I've got to say, when we watched it. My son played football for his team in the morning, and pouring down rain, hated that. I did, not him. And he got player of the match, so he was really, really happy. We went out for lunch to kind of celebrate. It's a bit of a tradition when he gets player of the match, which, you know, he's not in a good team like he used to be, so it happens a lot. Just kidding, if anyone from that team is listening. And then, yeah, we lost to Plymouth. And I found it quite funny because I was like, well, they're bottom of the championship, you know. So what? If that's what's going to put paid to our quadruple plans, kind of ironic. I quite like it. He was just inconsolable, really, really angry. So it ruined his day. But yeah, getting back onto the boxing talk. So the poll is now up. So do pick what you think is the best fight of the Frank Warren shows announced today. So starting at the start in Manchester, I guess my biggest thing is that it should have been in London. I know they've got a big thing with Co-op Live. They've probably got a preferential deal there. But you've got the top 4 fighters, the ones that were announced today, all from London. Dillian Whyte, Joe Joyce, and Lawrence Okoli, Richard Riakporhe, all Londoners. And they're fighting in Manchester. Makes 0 sense from that perspective. Aside from that bugbear, I think they're 2 decent fights. One maybe harder to call than the other. I've not seen any real explanation why Riakporhe's moved up to heavyweight. Also, that was a fight, him and Okoli, that probably should have been made down at cruiser when everyone was talking about it, and they were both still unbeaten. Now they've both lost to the same man, funnily enough, in Chris Billam-Smith, and he'll be looking on wondering, why he's not on such a huge card, although he's had a few huge cards of his own not too long ago, so maybe not be greedy, I suppose. Not that I'm saying he is, I'm putting words in his mouth. But yeah, I think you've got to favour Okoli in that. He's shown that he can compete at both bridgerweight and heavyweight since reigning at cruiser. And we don't know what to expect from Riakporhe at the heaviest weight division. Plus, in his last fight against Billam-Smith, probably one of his worst performances in the last couple of years, really didn't seem to turn up. And I want to give credit to Billam-Smith, of course. He negated a lot of what Riakporhe wanted to do. But at the same time, when the fight was clearly going against him, 6 rounds, 8 rounds in, we never really saw that switch up from Riakporhe. So he's got a lot to prove coming into this fight. The other big one on the bill, Dillian Whyte against Joe Joyce, I think should be rebranded as kind of a loser leaves boxing match. Although I said the similar sort of thing about Joyce against Chisora, and look at how Chisora's doing now. Although he won the fight, so I guess that makes sense. But yeah, loser leaves Queensberry. That's how I'd mark it, a bit like WWE. I thought for a long time that Joyce should retire. I think there's a few warning signs about his physical conditioning, and we'll wait and see how that all pans out. Dillian Whyte didn't look great in his last fight after ages of inactivity. It's hard to see him challenging for a world title again, either of them challenging for a world title again. So, yeah, I mean, whoever doesn't win that, I'd like to see pack it in perhaps. And maybe if Dillian Whyte comes through, he can have his role in his old rival Derek Chisora's swan song out in Riyadh, his 50th fight, and it'll be the final chance for Chisora to get a win over Whyte after controversially losing a decision the first time around and then getting wiped out in, I think it was round 11 of the rematch, despite winning on the cards, or 2 of the 3 cards, I believe it was. So, yeah, decent start. Then you go to Nottingham. We don't know a lot about the Nottingham card yet, but we do know the main event, which is an absolute cracker. The best of the 3 main events, in my view, that were announced today, which is Anthony Kakachi, who's been on incredible form recently after struggling with injuries and inactivity for a long period of his career. Now doing really well. And you've got Lee Wood, who, looked great at featherweight until just recently moving up to super featherweight. He's been waiting for a big fight. And we're so used to seeing Lee Wood on Matchroom cards. It'll be interesting to see him move over to a Queensberry show to challenge the Queensberry fighter in Kakachi. I think style should mesh really well in that fight. And you've got 2 good training camps and trainers as well. So it'll be a bit of a chess match with those guys in the corner too. So I'm really looking forward to that. Interesting to see what they add to the undercard. And then you've got the one out in Glasgow. Now, I've got to say, when it was first announced, when I first read it on the email that Josh Taylor would be fighting Echo Esserman, my immediate thought was mismatch. And I really like Echo, and I mean no disrespect. But you've got a former undisputed world champion who's only lost to world-class fighters going up against the guy who arguably peaked at British level. Now, Echo would argue that he hasn't peaked yet, and I hope that's true. But I think there's certain factors that make this a more competitive fight than it otherwise might be. We don't know what Josh Taylor's going to be like up at welterweight for a start. Echo Esserman's a career welterweight, very muscular physique, great engine, as befits his nickname. So that's a test in itself. And Josh Taylor hasn't looked like the Josh Taylor of old in some time. In fact, some might say he looks like an old Josh Taylor. See what I did there. And we'll wait and see how he gets on. But Echo Esserman has got nothing to lose. No one's going to be expecting him to win this fight. He'll go in. Sets of eyes will be on Echo Esserman that have never watched him before because he's going up against a well-known, world-class, as far as we're still aware, fighter in Josh Taylor. And even if he gives a good account of himself and doesn't win, it could do wonders for his career. So he'll be highly motivated. And will Josh Taylor be as motivated going down? Will he fight down to the level of opposition? That's kind of a key question as well. Has he still got it? What form will he show in the fight itself? So I'm actually a lot more intrigued by that fight than I was at first glance. And then you've got a couple of other fights on that Glasgow show that are really good as well. Like Nate Collins, who's a bit of a sleeper in the featherweight division, doesn't get talked about anywhere near enough. Last time I spoke to him, he was calling out Nick Ball. Well, he doesn't get Nick Ball, but he does get a WBC international title shot against Lee McGregor, who beat Isaac Lowe recently. He's on good form after some, troubles earlier in his career. I think that's an incredible. It's Edinburgh against Glasgow, on a Scottish card as well. That's a historic rivalry there. I remember the likes of, Alex Arthur against Willie Limond. There's probably much older ones than that, but I'm not quite old enough to talk to you with any knowledge about those. And Jameson on there as well. That fight's good too. That's obviously designed to be a step up for the Warren fighter and that, but Jameson will be in front of his home crowd and he'll be desperate to impress them as well. So I think the Glasgow show might be the best of the lot. So yeah, I think I've gone on for long enough about that. So let me go to the chat and then we'll get Ayman's take on the Nottingham and Glasgow shows. DB Cooper one says, why do you support Liverpool, Lord Flexen? You can call me that in future. I like that. Support your local posh Southern Nancy team. Surely posh are Peterborough, but that's a question for Josh Green. My family on my mum's side are from Liverpool, so I have got a reason. And I did support them for all those years of hurt since we won the league title in 90. Thunder Road says, can Ayman model the Inspector Gadget jacket behind him, or is it a lady's jacket? Ayman, is it?
That jacket is a very expensive one from Reese, one of my rare expensive purchases. But I actually saw, and shout out to Queensberry's Dev Sani wearing a similar one. I thought, you know what, that looks pretty cool. I think I need to, instead of looking like a bum when I turn up to some of these boxing shows, I need to look a bit more professional. So I thought I'd purchase a coat and put a little bit of money behind it. But I won't be modeling it today.
Well, all the female fans have just switched off at that, unfortunately. Al Cuerpo Boxing says, filler fights, but better than nothing. Salute to the UK brothers. I wouldn't call them filler fights necessarily. I think for the winners of the fights, then that's kind of a progression to the bigger shows and maybe Riyadh season, if that's what you're referring to. Thunder Rose says, any idea if Reactor is with Billy Nelson now, or was it just a temporary situation? I wasn't at the press conference today, so I'm not sure. But they were certainly together not that long ago. So it wouldn't surprise me. M. Gordon Collier says, Danny really knows his stuff. Proper boxing journalist. Justif won't kissable, sir. I don't understand the last few words of that. But I assume it's as complimentary as the rest. So thank you, M. Gordon Collier. Stephen says, hello, Danny. Frank has completely taken over the app. Game change, pal. The app. Dead zone. Yeah, I remember those days well. Oh, here he goes. Gordon Collier's had another go. Danny is a proper boxing journalist. He won't kiss Eddie Hearn's ass, so he doesn't get the interviews as much. I'm not sure that's the only reason, and he hasn't asked me to kiss his ass, particularly. But, I mean, I'm not saying I wouldn't either. Eddie? No, I'm joking. Stephen says, Danny, can I ask what's the latest with YouTube channels, including yours, in regards to promoter beef and so on? I'm not sure what you mean, Stephen. In terms of what? In terms of promoters beefing with us as a channel or beefing with each other? I mean, we haven't got any...
Arguments with each other and how it affects our channels, because views, I guess, because they're not batting at each other.
Right, I see. Yeah, I mean, I don't think our views have gone down particularly since they've stopped fighting each other. But obviously, if you've got a Frank Warren headline that's got him absolutely eviscerating Eddie Hearn or vice versa, it's going to do better than talking about the next move for even a Tyson Fury or an Anthony Joshua. So I suppose in that sense, it's had a bit of an impact, but it's offset, isn't it? The fact that the promoters are now working together and in harmony might take away some short-term views of the, emotive headlines or sensationalist headlines. It's evened out by the fact that we're now seeing more big fights happening on a regular basis. And then we're getting the views that way from those, as well as sponsorship and website and social media and so on. Basically, we're in a very good place, is what I'm saying. So, yeah, Ayman, going back to... Oh, actually, one last thing before I move on. The thing about DB Cooper 1, talking about Southern Nancy team, our youngest viewer, who I've mentioned on the episode before, Nancy in Watford, she actually read your comment, DB Cooper 1, and she thought it was about her, and she's been crying for the last 5 minutes. The crying bit's made up, but the other bit's not. So I think you owe her an apology, DB Cooper 1. We'll wait for that before putting you on a naughty step. So, Ayman, the Nottingham and Glasgow shows, you obviously gave your take on the... I nearly said London show then, because that's where it should be. You gave your take on the Manchester show. What do you make of the Nottingham and Glasgow shows, particularly the main events?
Yeah, so starting off with Josh Taylor's return to the ring. Glasgow, I think outside of the small hall shows or Scotland in general, hasn't really been given many big nights, and they're essentially dependent upon Josh Taylor's league. McGregor hasn't quite hit those highs as of yet, and some of the younger talents who are coming through, of course, are young talents and don't demand big arenas or big nights like a Josh Taylor would do. I think the fight in prospect, I understand what you're saying about the potential of it being a mismatch, but like you mentioned, with the kind of question mark surrounding Josh Taylor, I think it proves to be a fascinating type of fight, bearing in mind as well, too, when it comes to Echo Westerman. Sure, we know he's probably not got the skill set and not been to the highs that Josh Taylor has, but he is exactly what he says on the tin in terms of he's there throughout the fight, and he comes to fight. And his only losses come to Harry Scarf, and Harry Scarf is to his moniker, it's a horrible, horrible style that Harry Scarf uses, and you can see how someone like Esselman might falter there. But Josh Taylor, not to say that he's not a consummate boxer by any means, but Josh loves to get into a scrap. And at some point, that's going to turn into a scrap. Either it will be the first round or it'll go into the mid-rounds where it becomes just a trade shot-for-shot type of fight. And that's where Echo...
I'm just wondering if they were ever on the GB squad around the same time.
Good question.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking age-wise, they're probably similar age. And Echo was an amateur for quite a long time, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I bet they were. Might do a quick Google. You carry on, mate.
No worries. So, yeah, I think that makes for a real good fight. Lee McGregor versus Nate Collins. Another one, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. A good opportunity for both fighters. Probably favour Collins here in this fight. But Lee McGregor with all the pressure on his shoulders, with it being over in Scotland as well. So we'll see what happens in that one. And then Kakachi and Lee Wood. Kakachi's getting a lot of pelters, isn't he, from Eddie Hearn for not holding on to his belt and fighting his mandatory in Sugar Nunes. But I understand that with Kakachi getting on, his dream was probably to win the world title, and he's done that. He's fulfilled that. And for someone with the whispers around Kakachi was that he never truly loved boxing, and he had all the talent in the world, but he never really fulfilled it, never really stayed dedicated to the sport. So for him, I imagine to be able to have captured a world title and to just get the biggest paydays he can is what he looked for. And I think that's what this is. But it's also, from a British and domestic perspective, it's a real exciting fight between the two fighters who, again, they're very much front foot fighters looking for the knockout themselves. We'll see how Lee Wood's power translates against Kakachi. Tough one to call that. Lee's propensity to take shots probably makes him the slight underdog in the fight. Coupled with Kakachi's punch power himself and durability in the ring and just confidence that he's on, and I guess activity too. But that Nottingham Motorpoint Arena is going to be rocking on the night, and a powerful crowd might see Lee Wood to victory with Josh Hart either at ringside or in the stands cheering him on.
Yeah, Josh Hart was on to me yesterday, but he was on to me about the Glasgow show because I think he'd already mentioned the Nottingham show, and I said, yeah, you'll probably do it. And he was like, I really want to go to the Glasgow show. I said, being a bit greedy now, mate. Yeah, I've just done a quick Google. It does look like Esserman and Taylor were on the podium squad for GB around the same time. So I'd imagine they've sparred quite a lot. So that'll be interesting to talk about what their relationship was like back in the GB days, because they're very different characters by the look of it as well. You know, you got Echo Esserman, who's quite quiet, reserved, very gentlemanly though, you know, lovely guy. But then you got Josh Taylor, who's a bit more of an extrovert. So I wouldn't imagine they'd be like great friends on GB, but maybe I'm just trying to find a grudge where there isn't one.
Well, that's part of Josh Taylor's game, though, is finding that grudge. Because if there isn't that grudge there, does that take something away for Josh as well?
Yeah, very good point. Stephen says, I'm not sure if Frank sees something in Taylor that Esserman can beat, or is this just a normal Taylor headline show? Frank is a sneaky fox. Yeah, I mean, I would suggest that if he was kind of serving Esserman up as like a sneaky thing for Taylor, and Taylor was still with Top Rank, but he's actually signed Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor is now a Queensberry fighter. So I'm guessing Frank, knowing the value that Josh Taylor could still have at world level and on those big Riyadh season shows, is making his fight expecting and wanting Taylor to win. But he'll see it also as a great opportunity for Esserman, even if he doesn't win, as I mentioned earlier. So it's kind of win-win for Frank, isn't it, either way? But yeah, I don't think he's kind of serving Josh Taylor up as a big name on Esserman's record. I think, you know, you've got to make Taylor a pretty hefty favourite, even at welterweight, but great opportunity for Esserman, I think it's to say. DB Coop 1 says, just seen the White versus Joyce press conference. Low-key, kind of funny. Love Dillian White, proper character. See, DB Coop 1's ducked out to watch that for the last 10 minutes, so he doesn't have to apologise for his Nancy comments. We've got you, DB Cooper One. We know your tricks, mate. You're a sneaky fox as well. Never mind Frank. Yeah, so big fights that Frank's announced, but just a little bit, Ayman, about Frank Warren's now moved onto DAZN. A lot of people said, you know, less viewership overall than TNT, which he was on before. I guess the plus side, though, is that it now means a lot of the major promoters are all on one platform, which, alongside the rise of Riyadh season, makes those cross-promotional fights even easier to make. What impact do you think moving to DAZN will have on Frank Warren specifically and on boxing as a whole?
So it's hard to kind of answer because we've got to kind of really kind of see it develop. There were talks or rumors that both Frank and Eddie could share shows. We've seen a move with Riyadh season where fighters from different stables are sharing cards more. So you'd think that with DAZN being one platform where the majority of promoters now sit on, that would mean that there'd be more reason for promoters to come together to see their fighters share cards and have more cross-promotional fights outside of a 5 versus 5 basis. Not to say that it was never happening beforehand, but it was a lot more infrequent than we have been getting in recent months. So I presume and I hope that that would be the case, that there's more cross-promotional fights as we're seeing here with Lawrence Okoli and Richard Rakpor and Adelaide versus TKB, which I believe are 2 Queensberry versus Boxer fights on that card. Although Ben Shalom doesn't sit on DAZN. We don't know what the case is with Ben Shalom at the moment, but that's another conversation.
Feel free to go into it, Ayman, if you want to, mate.
No, we'll discuss that later on. Right. Yeah, so not too certain as to what it means in the long term, but we've had sort of threads as to what it might mean. Just got to wait and see on that point. For Frank, look, Frank wants to dominate. Frank wants to be the lead promoter. Frank has made signings to bring in US talent. So that, to me, seems that he's probably going to go on the similar sort of path that Eddie did, but with a more stronger focus on the UK. So Eddie Hearn supplements Frank Warren's UK offering whilst he goes and tries to dominate the US, and vice versa, where Frank will probably have some shows over in the US, but on a smaller scale, whilst he holds the UK. I think that seems to be the way the lay of the land as I see it. He's made a key focus on heavyweight boxing, and if he can keep bringing in the heavyweight signings, it means that he can litter his cards throughout the year with heavyweight talent, which brings more interest and intrigue into cards because of the way heavyweight boxing is. So I assume that although this is as of now, an all heavyweight card, there'll be a bit more scattered across the cards over the rest of the year and so on for DAZN. But I think Frank's on a warpath to be the number one promoter. I imagine in the future, whilst it's all rosy and all the promoters sit on DAZN, or the promoters who do sit on DAZN right now are looking to work together, eventually DAZN will look at it and think, this show is bringing us, or this promoter is bringing us more eyes to our product than that promoter. Do we funnel our funds to him and lessen them to this person so that we get more viewership because they prefer this show over that show, this offering over that one? And that's a conversation of down the line, but that's a conversation that I think is very much coming. So I hope that means competition between the promoters, which means better offerings and better cards throughout the nights, because I can't stand the cliche of stacked cards, and that's bounded about too frequently within boxing when it's not the case. But I think it will see that with the competition needing to flesh out cards with more depth and more quality, meaning that the viewers get to see a better standard of boxing on the whole, better standard of matchmaking on the whole. The other conversation surrounding it, though, is whether DAZN can get a stronger foothold within the UK, and that means that they can get the viewership on their fights, because as still is, Sky Sports for me probably stands as the number one platform for viewership because they hold football. I believe DAZN have picked up some football. I can't remember what the announcement was. It might have even been a few Champions League games. But if they're starting to get a foothold, that means with the money in the backing that they've got, they can get even more football and then maybe take over the market. So it seems like they're going the way to really take over boxing. It seems like they're going that way, but they still need a lot for UK fans to move over to an app to watch their fights.
DB Cooper one says, to quote a washed-up, drunk ex-Irish UFC fighter, I'm guessing, I ain't apologising for nothing. Sorry, Nancy. Well, that's kind of an apology, DB Cooper one. We won't put you on a naughty step just yet. But then he says, unfortunate name. It's not an unfortunate name if you're a girl, is it? It's only unfortunate to be called Nancy if you're a man or a boy. And it's very unlikely. I don't know. I've never heard of a boy called Nancy, not willingly anyway. But yeah, shout out to Nancy. Please don't stop watching because of the nasty man. And also to Nancy's mum, Nat, of course, who isn't commenting today. You're lucky, DB Cooper one, because she'd tear you a new arsehole. Martin Mulligan says, Coley was funny with the Madonna dig at Reactpor. They don't like each other. Ayman, have you seen that? Do you know what he said?
Yeah, he said that the reason that they beefed on the red carpet at the movie premiere was because Lawrence Coley told Richard Reactpor that Madonna was too old. Obviously, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek remark, but he's just having a little dig at their relationship, which Reactpor says is a friendship, not relationship.
Ageism and sexism in the same insult. It's not very Me Too of you, is it, Lawrence Coley? Then Lawrence Coley used to have a relationship with a slightly less famous than Madonna musician in his own right. I wonder if Reactpor had a dig back somehow about that. DB Cooper one also says, what happened to Josh Taylor singing with Matchroom? I don't think he's got the voice for it, mate. He's more of a baritone. Stephen says, only a matter of time before Hearn gets cornered. He can carry on his little next-gen shows, though. I'm sure he appreciates your permission there, Stephen. Cuss's System says, Eddie set the trend. Saudi Arabia, YouTube, female boxing, Sunday boxing. What he did at Sky, what he did at DAZN. However, Frankie is the main man now. The only Frankie we're talking about is Modfather Frank today. I think Frank Warren doesn't go by Frankie. But it's a good point, Dennis. I think Eddie did set the trend on a number of the things we're seeing more widespread now. But Warren bided his time. He's a constant survivor. And, you know, he's used Tyson Fury and his relationship with him. And then furthermore, extended that with Riyadh season and Turki Alalshikh to have arguably the best time of his career at, you know, a relatively late stage. Stephen says, Dead Zone got the Club World Cup in the summer, but the Premier League will be impossible for them to get. DB Cooper one says, does Madonna have any more gigolo vacancies that need filling? Asking for my mate Ayman Khan, not to be confused with Amen Khan. Ayman is Madonna? I didn't think I'd be asking this today, but is she a bit of you, the Queen of Pop?
No, I tell you what is a bit of me, though. This Black Sabbath gig that's happening in the Villa Stadium. I think it's in July, is it? So if anyone knows anyone at Ticketmaster, a Live Nation, they got like Metallica performing, they got Limp Bizkit, they got Korn, they got Disturbed. If anyone's got a contact, let me know, because I'm queuing up early tomorrow morning to try and nab a few tickets. That's
an interesting segue. I'm not quite sure how we got there, but yeah, I mean, Ayman, live your dream, mate. if SO Live can help you to get to that concert, it's like the premise for a movie, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, Stephen says DB Cooper one made him chuckle. Well, there's one. Well done, DB Cooper. It's a first for you. So we talked a lot about Riyadh season just on the periphery of these events, because obviously these are Frank Warren Queensberry promotion events. But they did make a splash of their own last week in not only signing arguably still the biggest draw commercially in the sport in Canelo Alvarez, thus scuppering any chance of him fighting Jake Paul, which a lot of people would be happy about, but also using their acquisition of the Ring magazine, which apparently was going to be completely independent of Riyadh season, but using that in a way to feed disinformation, something they've been criticised for to the public in order to get the Canelo deal over the line. Ayman, what was your first reaction to, first of all, that journalists, reputable in some cases, were reporting that Canelo Jake Paul was pretty much done, and then to the fact that Turkey and Ring magazine, in fact, came out with the announcement that he'd signed a 4-fight deal with them instead?
Yeah, it was explosive news to wake up to on the day. I can't remember which day it was last week, but a lot had happened during the 40 winks sleep that I'd got, and back and forth. The deal was on, the deal was off. You got the whispers of it during the day as I think Hearn and Warren were interviewed, and both Hearn and Warren were sort of putting it out there as to their feeling that Canelo and Jake Paul was going to be over the line. To be honest with you, with the whole situation, I was never fully sold on this idea that Canelo and Jake Paul was going to happen, because I was confused by, it was put out by the Ring that Crawford and Canelo had reached an agreement, and then all of a sudden the fight was off, and there was I think Frank was alluding to a dispute around the weight. But surely if you've come to an agreement, the agreement was the weight, because there was nothing else to really agree on apart from money, of course.
Money, yeah.
But the fight is about the weight. So Frank to then come out and say, I think there's a problem with the weight, I couldn't quite buy that. So I just wondered if Jake Paul negotiations there might have just been used to build up a little bit more hype to announce Canelo signing with Riyadh season and get a bit more hype on the Crawford fight, because people started expecting that fight. So they needed just a little bit more of a bump of hype in that fight. So that's what I wondered. But taking it on face value as to what it was, and let's say it was the situation, yeah, look, I mean, there is a little bit of that and the independence of the Ring magazine, but it's also...
Could we just clarify what actually happened? Because I want to make sure I've got this right.
Go on.
Is it correct that the Ring magazine social media account put out something that said the Ring understands that a deal is close or is going to happen with Canelo and Jake Paul? And then Turki Alalshikh did an interview later on, I think it was with ESPN, saying, yeah, I've kind of said that, but this is what's really happening. Is that right?
I can't quite remember the timeline, to be honest with you, Danny. I want to be spot on with it. So I'm scrolling through the Ring magazine Twitter account as we speak, just to get a refresher in the line.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's where it was. And then there were some accusations from other Twitter accounts basically saying they've said that the Jake Paul deal is over the line in order to encourage negotiations for Canelo to actually sign the 4-fight deal with Riyadh season. I mean, I haven't got a big thing against it, to be honest, but I just think be a bit more open about it. Just say, yep, we own Ring magazine. They are part of Riyadh season. And, just like, WWF magazine back in the day, or, official football club magazines. There's nothing wrong with, using that to your advantage if you claim it as an asset and use it as a marketing tool. I don't have a problem with it, but it's more the whole emphasis on independence originally. If that's now been, that's now been contradicted, then that would be disappointing, I suppose. But then maybe don't make an emphasis on independence in the first place, just making a rod for your own back. How are you getting on with your scrolling?
Yeah, so cheers, Danny, for buying me the time. So I've got here February 7th, says from the Ring magazine, Turki Alalshikh is suspending efforts to finalise contracts for Canelo Alvarez for Terence Crawford in September in the wake of Alvarez's novelty bout with Jake Paul, sources tell ESPN. Then it moves on to Canelo Alvarez and Jake Paul in the process of finalising a deal for May 3rd cruiserweight title fight, T-Mobile Arena, Las Vegas. Then it moves on to Turki Alalshikh has revealed a 4-fight deal between Canelo Alvarez and Riyadh season is done. First fight will be held in May. And then it moves on to the Ring has learned that the widely reported May fight between Canelo Alvarez and Jake Paul is off. And then the final thing, just to cap you off, Terence Crawford reacting to Canelo Alvarez 4-fight deal. There's a post there which they put out too.
So I mean, we don't want to dwell on this element of it for too long, because the big news is, of course, Canelo signing with Riyadh Season, who he's going to be fighting, which is William Skull in May and then Crawford in September to start with. We don't know about the next two after that. But yeah, I mean, I think I've covered what I wanted to say about that anyway. I have no problem with them using an asset as a marketing tool. I just don't think they should have, in the original sense, said we're going to keep it completely separate, because obviously now that's proven to not be the case very, very soon after they said it. But yeah, very exciting news. I wasn't particularly wanting to see Canelo against Jake Paul, so I'm quite happy about that. Skull is a decent enough opponent. He's got one of the belts that Canelo had to relinquish, so it is going to be an undisputed fight once again. Decent enough operator. I think Canelo wins fairly comfortably, but it's a good debut for him with Riyadh Season, and it builds up to what will be a mega fight in September with Terence Crawford. I've seen a lot of people on social media and in our own YouTube comments today picking Crawford to win that fight. And no one was really saying that when it was first mooted a year or so ago. The tide seems to be turning with the opinions there. Ayman, I'll get your take on the Canelo fights in a sec. I'm just going to go to the chat. Zambanu Love says Madonna is still a good name to have on the resume, even if she's past her best. Yeah, faded former champ, but still got something to teach, I think, is the boxing analogy there. DB Cooper 1 says, my job here is done. I can now die a happy man. Thanks, Stephen, for laughing at his joke. Michael Thompson says, Ames has good taste. Stephen, on a similar note with the music gig or weekend that Ayman wants to go to. Ayman Khan and Josh Hart in a mosh pit. Game change there. Yeah, indeed. Captain Casual says, Ames desperate for getting those tickets. Boxing Asylum last night, SO Live today. Big Boy Garms says, Turkey shut down that rubbish YouTube boxing. DB Cooper 1 says, Canelo is now the proud owner of 50 oil wells, 13 oil refineries, 82 oil tankers, 33% of Newcastle United, and 5 streets in Mayfair. I was going to sing that to the tune of 12 Days of Christmas, but I just couldn't in the end. I haven't got the breath control. Can't have been cheap. Captain Casual says, took over the elusive Michael Benson X account as well, that being the Ring magazine. Michael Thompson says, decent enough opponent, describes his last 4 fights too. Disappointing again from Canelo. Yeah, but you can't blame him, can you? Like someone said this on social media yesterday. They no longer consider him a pound-for-pound contender because of the opposition he's fighting, but he's earned the right to do that. He's probably the richest boxer in the sport currently, isn't he? And now he's with Riyadh Season. That's not going to change. It's just going to get more and more. Like the gap between him and whoever's number 2 is going to get bigger. Yeah, I mean, who do you want him to fight that he hasn't fought, I guess is the point. And not in terms of a hardcore boxing fan, but what's going to make a big mega fight, a big money fight as well that he hasn't had. David Benavidez, I suppose, stands out. He's beaten everyone else around. He's beaten Caleb Plant. He's beaten David Morrell. But aside from him, there's no one particularly where I'm kind of clamoring for Canelo to fight. Bivol, maybe, but then I don't see it going any different to the first time. And I'm happy for Canelo to stay at super middleweight. I'm quite interested in the Crawford fight, to be honest. Ayman, what's your take on Skull and then Crawford in September? If he gets past Skull, of course.
No real interest in Skull and Canelo, to be honest with you. And look, I get it, a cover boxing. Maybe I should have a little bit more intrigue, but that Skull and that Shishkin and Skull fight wasn't the best of fights. And I speak to Dimitri Salita every now and again just to get an update of his fighters, events, and his stable as a whole. And off of the back of that fight, a lot of people kind of felt that Shishkin won, and it was, I remember, mooted to have those two have a rematch. Shishkin, of course, would kick himself if he didn't, because he would have landed the Canelo fight. But I guess it's the first of a 4-fight deal, and I think what they want is, or what Crawford probably wants is, look, if I'm going to go and jump up the weights to fight Canelo Alvarez, an elite level fighter, still, I want it to be for the full undisputed titles. I want Canelo to have all those titles so I can have that legacy and history in one fell swoop. That's a testament to the confidence of Terence Crawford and the want to really define his legacy in the sport. Now, whether he can do it is another question. Conversations I've had with fighters in talking about the fight and having had experience with sparring Terence Crawford, they've all been saying that Crawford can do it and are leaning towards Terence pulling off the victory. I myself have some reservations on that. We'll be backing Canelo Alvarez to get the victory. I just can't see how the weight. I'd see it as being too. It's too insurmountable for someone who has an elite level IQ and skill set, but he's up against someone else who has an elite level IQ and skill set too. And I think, of course, the days of prime Canelo are long past it, but he still operates at a very high level, even though he's still crude, a little bit more cruder with his offense, and probably looking to seek the knockout from the off with a big looping overhand right like he did Amir Khan. But I think eventually that weight will tell its toll on Terence later on in the fight. I see Canelo Alvarez getting a convincing victory over Crawford, but it's not impossible for Terence. But that's the type of fight I guess I'm interested in. You mentioned there with the other names, Benavidez, I think, has earned his chance after Canelo called for these fighters to fight each other as opposed to waiting for the Canelo sweepstakes as there were once the Mayweather sweepstakes. He's earned his ticket now after beating Morrell convincingly, although there were some spots of bother. Benavidez came through that, and like you mentioned, they're beating his other the other contenders. I think the rematch with Bivol probably stands to be one that holds interest for Canelo Alvarez. Whether it is Bivol who holds the undisputed titles or Beterbiev in the rematch might be of more intrigue to Canelo, but the idea of Canelo taking on Beterbiev, I'm not too sure where he stands on that. Those are three of the fights, I imagine. The fourth, I wouldn't count out someone like a Eubank Jr. potentially, or even a Hamza Shiraz. If they can build Hamza Shiraz, who I think Hamza's got a real opportunity, of course, vying for his first world title at middleweight against Adames, which is a tough fight. But I think that could be a huge fight. Daniel, I'll jump back to you just because you got to shoot out. I guess we'll move on to our next segment.
Yeah. I've got to drop my kid at kickboxing. Not literally drop him. He's getting quite good now, so it'll probably be him dropping me. But yes, I've obviously already had my say on Canelo, but it is time to segue to segment 3, which isn't easy to say. And that's Derek Chisora once again rolling back the clock against, I've got to say, a very disappointing Otto Wallen. But I can lay in to my former friend from Sweden when I get back. But Ayman, yeah, take it away.
Yeah, so Derek Chisora was back in the ring. The last dance, which I guess now proves not to be the last and final dance, having made a shock U-turn. Derek Chisora, I guess, avenues to have a fight over in Africa. He didn't seem too interested in, also maybe the infrastructure and the social political climate wasn't right there, conducive for a big boxing match over in Africa. So it seems, anyway. I'm not too well versed on that, but that seems to be what the whispers are as to that situation, which sees Derek Chisora off the back of a victory over Otto Wallen, who I mentioned here earlier in the Seconds Out live chat and conversation with Danny that I thought Otto Wallen was going to win this fight. And it just seemed as soon as Derek Chisora was able to, and some of you Boxing Asylum listeners will have heard this from me yesterday, as soon as Derek Chisora was able to breach through Otto Wallen's range that he was trying to maintain with the jab and the footwork, as soon as that was breached and pretty easily breached, it meant that Derek Chisora was able to just get through to Otto Wallen. That came at the cost of some very accurate jabs and very accurate shots to the head, but not enough, and not with enough strength to hold off or make Chisora think twice about those marauds forward. And that meant that Otto's game was essentially out the window. He can't or didn't show that he could fight on the inside. That's Derek Chisora's wheelhouse, and that was Derek Chisora's game. So he just needs to repeat that for the rest of the rounds, and he did do that. Otto Wallen maybe winning 1 or 2 rounds at most. The shot that knocked him down, the first knockdown, was for a fighter of Otto's ability, I thought was really poor, really comical from Otto to stand in front of Derek with a long looping shot. That wasn't befitting of a fighter who had Tyson Fury in real crisis, and of a fighter who looked like he could cause fighters at the top level some problems. Someone who'd beaten Murat Gassiev on away soil, and Gassiev packs a punch as well. It just didn't seem like Otto really wanted it at the weekend, and that was a real shame to see that. And I think he's got to really assess where he stands in the heavyweight division. Some might point the finger and say that the knockout to Joshua has really put a dent in him, but I didn't see a fighter who was particularly. I don't think he was scared or apprehensive to do it, because he took Chisora's shots. He felt them. I think he felt Chisora's strongest shot and came forward. It's just whether the endeavor and ambition, the real devil was in him, like it was in that Fury fight. Maybe it was because it was a fight that didn't have much on the line, but then again, it was a form of eliminator. Maybe he just didn't like the style and didn't want Derek Chisora. Just found out that there wasn't that bit of dog in him, and he was outdogged on the night. A lot of questions falling Otto Wallen's way, but Derek Chisora is the winner, and he asked the questions of the fans in the ring afterwards in his monologue, I guess you'd call it. And he said to the fans, and I'll ask you guys as well in the chat as Danny's departed, waiting for him to come back. He said, "Do you want to see me fight Alexander Usyk in my 50th and final fight?" Big roar from the crowd. "Do you want to see me fight Anthony Joshua, my 50th and final?" Big roar from the crowd too. And then, "Do you want to see me fight Daniel Dubois in my final fight?" Bit of boos, bit of jeers. No one really that ruling out Daniel Dubois, although that seems to be the path going through the IBF route. So that leaves Joshua and Usyk, at least in Derek Chisora's mind, as to what the public wants. And Usyk, tough prospect, although Usyk credits him as giving him this a real tough test and the hardest shot he'd taken at heavyweight. And then Anthony Joshua, who's a friend of his and unlikely as to seeing them two square off. And my colleague Brady Rahim put that to him as whether he'd want to fight Anthony Joshua and potentially retire him. And he said no, he didn't want to do that. Some names that are out there at the moment, of course, the one that's been talked about a lot is the Dillian Whyte trilogy fight, and Dillian Whyte has said that he wants a trilogy, and that at the front of most people's minds are those two terrific fights between Whyte and Chisora, and that seems the most obvious choice to go down for the both of them. He ruled out Francis Ngannou as an option that didn't really interest him. It was mentioned on the Asylum yesterday as a name of intrigue that David Hay had apparently teased something was in the works for him, a potential boxing return in 2025. I'm not too sure about that, not heard much about that at all, or whether that's been kept in close-knit circles, but the prospect of David Hay returning to the ring to fight Derek Chisora doesn't appeal to me too much. And David Hay's announcements usually mean something to do with a poker sort of tournament where he's going to knock out George Groves or something along those lines. Or I suggested Vladimir Klitschko because he's mooted to return to the ring, and maybe those two might have a fight for Derek Chisora's 50th. But I guess Derek has earned a ticket to have another fight. He's earned that right, although there are calls for him to end his career. But he's adamant that he wants to get to the 50th fight, and he's also adamant that the 50th will be his final fight. I hope it is the case, because Derek was quick to U-turn on this being his last dance in the UK and say that he will have another fight in the UK. I just hope he keeps to his promise and he can sail off into the sunset with the riches that he's earned with his and share it amongst his children and their children's children, and stay in boxing in terms of promotion or a pundit, because Derek is very well liked by many within the community. But he roars on to another victory against an underwhelming Otto Wallen. And Danny's back. Danny, do you feel the same way?
Is this where I stick the boot in?
You can stick the boot in if you want.
Stick the Christian Louboutin. Yeah, I mean, Otto Wallen. And part of this, I've got to be honest, part of this is because I did predict he would win. I predicted he'd win probably on points, maybe a late stoppage. I just thought style-wise he was all wrong for Chisora, and I thought technically he was a better fighter than Chisora. I'm not sure either of those things are untrue, but that may be just covering my own back. Yeah, he was pretty bad. Like, I understood why he didn't perform against Joshua. Joshua came out the blocks quickly. used his jab very effectively, backed Wallen up, and he was very cautious about coming into range because he knew that he'd get tagged with Joshua's backhand. And so he kind of took him out of the game. And whenever Wallen's been asked since about the Joshua fight, you know, what did you do wrong? What have you learned from it? The main message he's given is, well, Joshua was just very good on that night. And I think that's fair enough. You know, that's humble, that's honest. But in this case, Chisora didn't do anything different from what he always does. And that's no discredit to him. What he does very well. We saw, you know, 2 or 3 rounds against Usyk where he did it incredibly well, for example, although that was a few years ago. He came forward, he threw big winging punches, overhand rights, left hooks, body shots. You know, some of them light, some of them heavy, mixing it up, and then balled his opponent against the ropes, leaned on a bit, just generally made life uncomfortable. And we've seen him do it against a certain level of opposition that have a similar style to Wallen. You know, David Price, who tried to keep it long, and a few others. But in this case, having seen Wallen go out to Turkey and be a kind of adopted home fighter in Gassiev, and the fight he gave Fury as well, I don't know if it's a case of Chisora just intimidated him from the start with his style, or if the Otto Wallen that we've seen produce the goods in the past just isn't there anymore. He's suffered a lot from inactivity as well. But he didn't throw the jab anywhere near enough, which against the pressure fighter, a bobber and a weaver like Chisora, is key. You know, doubling up, tripling up the jab. And when he did use the jab, it was quite light. He never varied the pace. He never varied the positioning of the jab. He didn't jab to the body very often. I mean, I'm not trying to bury the guy here, jokes aside, but you've got to do something. And again, this is like I said earlier about when the fight's not going your way, changing it up. 6 rounds in, he hadn't won a round. And he was getting beaten up. He was getting pushed back. He was getting belaboured to the body, and he was getting heavy punches shipped to the head. And there was never, and I didn't see enough of his corner work on the feed to say who or what they were telling him to do. But never really saw much from him. Never really used the backhand to any great degree. You know, he was moving well and he was getting out of Chisora's way. But then as he got tired, he was just moving back in straight lines and inviting Chisora onto him because he was too tired to do anything else. That could have been avoided by better work in the first half of the fight. And now it's more whether he couldn't or he wouldn't. And we don't know. And he'll have to think about that. But Josh Hart messaged me just after that fight finished on Saturday night and said, I can't see any, and I'm paraphrasing, I can't see anyone giving Wallen a big fight again. And I think that's fair enough. You know, he made a lot of ground off the Fury fight. You know, he gave Fury a very tough fight. And as someone pointed out in the chat, he only won a couple of rounds, really. But because he cut Fury and it was a mauling fight, it made it look closer than it was. And he made his name off of that and eventually got another big fight, or relatively big fight, against Gassiev and then against Joshua. And against Joshua, he wasn't really in the fight at all. And you can accept that because of Joshua's status, particularly at the time, and the way he approached that fight. But against someone like Chisora, who, and no disrespect, I think Chisora's great. You know, he's had a great career, and I hope he wins his 50th fight and sails off into the sunset. It's still got plenty of money, I hope, as well. But Chisora is not a top 10 heavyweight in 2025. He's, you know, fringe of it. He's a gatekeeper. He's a very good gatekeeper, and he'll beat people outside the top 10 on many occasions. He'll upset the apple cart. But Otto Wallen, if he's got any business being the fighter who wants to challenge for a world title and wants to be up there with the Furies and people like that, you can't be not only losing to Chisora, but getting absolutely dominated by him at the age Chisora is now. You know, we've seen, you know, people we wouldn't consider amazing talents either defeat Chisora or at least give him a hard fight. And that's back when Chisora was nearer to his prime as well. So, yeah, I don't want to take too much away from Chisora, but I was very disappointed with Otto Wallen's performance.
I hear you, Danny. I hear you completely, and I get it. And I don't think you're particularly sticking the boot in. I'd like to know what went on with the camp or what the game plan was from Otto. He was with Joey Gamache, who's kind of been in and out the corner, and a lot of people kind of said that when it comes to Otto Wallen, he'd been at his best when it was Joey Gamache in his corner. So I do wonder what really was their thought of how they were going to come out the weekend with the victory. But I don't quite see Otto Wallen as someone who won't get featured on a big show. He's still got that, I guess, that bit of value. And And he's for heavyweights coming up. He's a non-punching, a little bit awkward heavyweight. So you'd see him as someone who's not a lot of risk, although you might not get a lot of reward. You can have him as a name on your record on the way up to something bigger if you're having 3 fights in a year. And Otto will still put up a bit of a fight, but I don't want to rule him out of ever winning again, kind of thing. But I think he kind of moves right far down the pile after last weekend's performance.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. What of Chisora now, though? Fight number 50. We assume that this, recent Indian summer won't encourage him to take more than that. If it is going to be his final fight, and we think it's going to be in Riyadh, although I know there's been talk of a show in Africa, perhaps. Who would you like to see him bow out against?
I don't want to see him against Daniel Dubois. I don't want to see him against Alexander Usyk. Joshua, I don't think it ever happens because of their friendship. White is the front runner when it comes to Chisora. I think that's how he probably wants to end his career, in a trilogy against Dillian White. He's not interested in Francis Ngannou. David Hayes suggesting that he's having a comeback. I don't really want to see David Hay in the ring in 2025. I don't know how much he's got left to offer. Klitschko might be an option with his return to the ring to older statesmen. And if Klitschko's got a bit more ambition, then maybe that's someone he'd think he'd have to come. Yeah, I mean, that actually might be it. If Klitschko wants to win the world title and Chisora just got himself into an eliminator position after winning that might be the route back into the rankings for him if the IBF would sanction that. Other than that, I think the names sort of dry up. If it's not White, even a Joyce win, if Joyce is to beat White, as I think, is the interest really there in that fight? I think White is the number one name.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just poignant, isn't it? It just makes sense. And it would be a hard fight to call unless Dillian White, rolls back the clock in his own right and just destroys Joe Joyce in their fight. But I think even then, I think Chisora and White at any stage of their careers are always going to give each other a tough fight. Just for pride, if nothing else. I'm just going to go through the chat. I don't know where you got up to on the chat, Eamon, while I've been gone. So if I repeat any...
I didn't go to the chat.
Oh, well, there you go. See, Eamon hates you lot. And I don't blame him. Right. Jay Jones says, go rewatch the fight. He made Otto look world class. He hasn't looked like that in any other fight. That's talking about Fury. Del Boy was never Big Boy Garms. Del Boy was never leaving on 49. Well, no, we know that it was his last dance in the UK. Although if he'd lost, it might have been hard to make that 50th fight. Del Boy is a mix of boxing and entertainment. Someone gets hurt in his fights. Stephen, again, this is the comment I saw earlier. Fury won 10 rounds against Wallen. That cut distorted people's eyes. DB Cooper won. Chisora somehow got better with age. His stamina is freakish. Chisora of today beats Chisora from 5 years ago. Couldn't disagree with that more, to be honest. I think Chisora has just been matched better recently than he was in the past. I don't think his stamina's improved from where it was. I think he's always had good stamina. And if he trains hard, that will always show on fight night. But, it wasn't that long ago we saw Chisora. We even did it against Wallen, standing in the corner, just waiting, trying to lure him in. And in this case, it was to set a trap. But in other cases, it's been because he's tired. But yeah, we'll agree to differ on that one. Michael Thompson says, really don't need to see another Usyk versus Chisora fight, echoing Ayman's comments. Jay Jones, agreeing with me here, says he hasn't got better with age. He got outclassed by Fury a couple of years ago and has had an easy run. Joyce, who is on the way out, and Wallen, who is terrible. I mean, he's certainly terrible on Saturday. Stephen says, Frank Warren wants to make Dubois Chisora if Dubois beats Parker. Warren is a savage for that. Dubois Chisora is scary. Yeah, but that's Warren's main thing at the moment, isn't it? Is Dubois at heavyweight, and ultimately it'll be Moses Itauma after that. So if he needs to serve up Chisora, and Chisora's retiring anyway, so there's no ongoing value in a Chisora win for Warren, is there? So you can't really blame him. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to see it. Thunder Road says, is Russ, aka Porky's Corner, allowed on the Boxing Asylum? Eamon, that's one for you.
The Boxing Asylum's motto has always been that anyone is allowed to come on should they want to come on. So the door's open for anyone, whether it be one of you guys, whether it be Danny Flexen, whether it be Russ from Porky's Corner. They've got to want to come on. So as far as I'm aware, there's no ban for anyone or Russ.
Captain Casual says, Mickey T, really don't need to see another Chisora fight, full stop. Jay Jones beat a finished Joyce and terrible Wallen, and people saying he's fresh and deserves the title shot. Jay Jones put loads here, so I'll skip a few of those. Thunder Rose says if Chisora remains a gatekeeper, then Joe Joyce is now a floor mat. That's a bit harsh, but let's see. Let's see after the fight with Dillian White, I suppose. Stephen says fair to say that Chisora beat Joyce and Wallen before the bell. Two nice guys, but Wallen looked intimidated by Chisora inside and out of the ring. Maybe, I don't know. I think people, do you know what? I think Chisora is a much harder guy to fight than he looks when you're watching him on TV. I mean, he looks like a hard guy to fight for me either way. But actual boxers who are technically gifted, great footwork and things like that, you'll look at Chisora and think, well, he comes forward in straight lines. There's not a lot of variety to his work. If I can just keep him off me, if I can use my feet, should be an easy night's work. And it certainly was for Fury on 3 occasions. And it certainly was for Ajit Kabayel when he beat him, 10 years ago or whatever it is now. So it just depends. But I think someone like Wallen or Joe Joyce will look at it and think the same thing and then get in there with him. And it's absolutely knackering, I would imagine. If you haven't got quite the level of footwork of a Tyson Fury, for example, or you haven't got enough of a pop to keep Chisora off of you, keep him honest, then you're going to have a very hard night, not just physically, but mentally as well. Landing your best shots on someone, they keep coming forward like the Terminator. I mean, it must be really disheartening. So, yeah, I mean, I think there is that kind of this disparity. That's not a word. Discrepancy or disparity. Pick which one suits better. Michael Thompson says, White would be a good last fight for Chisora. He arguably won the first fight. David Dack says, was Paul a genuine fight or a tool to get a payday from Turkey? We'll never know. That's the thing. John Wick says, Danny, you have spoke with enough boxers to gauge this. Is Joyce punch drunk? I've talked about this on the podcast many times before. I think Joyce should retire. I've seen signs, and I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I've seen signs that there may be some issues with Joyce that weren't apparent earlier in his career. Punch drunk's not really a proper term, so I don't really want to go down that road. But there's certain things in terms of the way he talks, the way he reacts to light, and other issues as well, the way he moves, not necessarily in the ring, that give me cause for concern. Now, again, I'm no expert in that field, and I could be completely wrong. But if I was him, someone close to him, in his team, in his family, I'd want him to have every possible medical test there is before agreeing to put him in a fight against any sort of decent fighter or a decent puncher. And I would hope, because they do have his best interest at heart and I've got a lot of time for the people at SJAM and so on, I would hope that that's exactly what they've done. And that they've at least reassured themselves that he's in no greater risk than any other boxer out there. Jay Jones says, Joyce has had way too many spars, too many amateur fights, now pro. He's definitely CTE going on. We can't say definitely. None of us are medical experts here, unless there are any, doctors in the chat. But yeah, we don't know for sure about that. All I would say is what we're led to believe are signs of CTE may be apparent, but there may be other causes for those as well. Got to be very careful because we're talking about a man's career and his life, in fact. So that's what could be next for Chisora. What about what could be next for Ben Shalom and Boxers All-Female show, headlined by Natasha Jonas against Lauren Price? Because a couple of fighters have come out over the last couple of weeks and suggested that all is not well with that show. In fact, 2 fighters in particular, or at least the people around them, have said that they turned up to the press conference for the much-lauded show at the Royal Albert Hall, but were then told there was nothing there for them to do. Bit like in the old WWF days, Ayman, where...
catering.
Yeah, wrestlers would be sent to catering because the writers wouldn't have anything for them. Really baffling stuff. And it didn't get a lot of attention when the team around Francesca Hennessy mentioned it, I think, on Instagram initially. But then last week, Savannah Marshall's voice was made quite clear across a number of social media platforms that she was told she'd be on the card, then told she wasn't, invited to the press conference, then had nothing to do there. And she said she won't now be on the card because of a dispute, I think she called it, with Boxer. What do you make of how this has all unfolded? Because it's kind of taken the shine off what, in essence, is quite a nice thing, a forward-thinking concept.
Well, let's inform the listeners straight off the bat here. We do have an interview coming out with Savannah Marshall where I've asked her to flesh out what happened with the Boxer and the conversation surrounding her and her next fight. So that's coming out on Seconds Out very soon. Of course, as well, too, her reaction to Clarissa Shields picking up more belts at heavyweight. So do look out for that. But yeah, it was quite concerning just seeing, and I think you forwarded it to me as well, Fran Hennessy feeling, I'm not quite sure if these were her words, but the embarrassment or the, I guess, disrespect of being brought over. I think she was told that she'd be on the card, then informed that she wasn't going to be on the card. And I imagine that would be the case, because why else would you be there? Yeah, you want to support people, but if you're thinking that you're going to be on the card and then you're told that you're not on the card, like with Savannah Marshall, you would feel a little bit embarrassed. Like, what am I here to talk about? I'm trying to get my career kind of going. I want to be on these type of big fights and big occasions, especially for someone like Savannah Marshall, who headlined the first one. You'd want to continue on that and give as much as you can to these type of fight nights. And the best way by doing that is by being on the card. So completely understand and sympathize with their feelings on that night, and their disappointment to not be fighting on that card too. As far as I'm aware, as to the situation, I did reach out to Ben Shalom. I didn't get a response from Ben Shalom, but as far as I'm aware, the fight is going ahead between Jonas and Price. Joe Gallagher has also requested drug testing to be on both fighters. Haven't had an update on that either.
Who Joe Gallagher suggesting pays for it, I think, is the key question there.
I think, look, in amongst, you've got to widen the context with just this fight and the conversation surrounding Boxer. And we don't know what the situation is with their TV deal, whether that's going to be extended, whether that's not going to be extended on the same money, extended with more money, whether that's going to be just let out to see its course and Boxer move to another platform, whether it be TNT. Who I was made aware that they did make a bid for Frank to stay on to TNT, but he moved to DAZN. Whether DAZN come in for Boxer for their shows, don't know what the lay of the land is for Boxer. I would think that if Boxer was to, if Boxer were to get a new deal, potentially the money wouldn't be a large enough increase to then support all the boxers that they have who are on more money than they were when they started off, because they've climbed higher up the ladder, so they have to cut their cloth accordingly. That might be the situation. Don't know that to be the case, but I'd speculate that. But that might mean that then you'd have to drop fighters off of cards and make sure cards are a lot more sustainable than maybe they might have been beforehand. Again, don't know that to be the case, but that's just speculation. But Boxer, I just think... I mean, Hassan Azim as well. Hassan Azim was also on the recent Azim versus Lipinets card, but he also wasn't on the podium either for that press conference, which I thought was a little bit weird. I think Boxer trying to do things a little bit differently, but Savannah Marshall, just a little bit of a conversation from the conversation we had out onto Seconds Out Live today. She's put it down to a little bit of a miscommunication, but there is still a dispute between the two of them. So we'll see how that how the chips fall on that one, but she doesn't have anything penciled in, whether it be in the ring or in the cage, and that's the main disappointment here, is that two fighters now are coming out and saying that they're missing out on opportunities, their careers are stalling, and you never really want, as a promoter, to be the cause of a fighter's stuttering career for any reason. You want that to be because of an injury or losses happen in the sport, but because they're not on cards or whatever it is, or they can't find dates, or maybe, again, don't know this to do the situation, or can't pay them, that's always a little bit of worry. So I think I'm looking forward to our next chat with Ben Shalom, and I'll be asking that question of him.
Well, I'll just go to the chat before I talk a little bit about it. Zambanu Love. Oh, no, sorry. Got to go a bit higher up the chat. DB Cooper 1 says, I like to stick up for Ben Shalom. Why? Gets a lot of stick. The establishment media is against him. Not sure that's true. But my God, he makes so many rookie errors, does himself no favours. I agree with some of your post. I won't say which bit. Jay Jones, Danny, I was outside Asda the other day and some people were giving out leaflets. I thought it was paintballing and it ended up being free Boxer tickets. Did you walk away, Jay Jones, and say, I wish that would have been paintballing. That's the question. So Banu Love says, to be fair, Savannah Marshall has 1 foot in MMA. Surely you need 2 to have any sort of success. Somehow has held on to the IBF title despite not defending it for 18 months. Can't expect boxers to have her as a priority if they're not one for her. Yeah, I'm not saying she should be a priority for them, but if you tell someone they're fighting and invite them to the press conference, you kind of go through with it, don't you? I mean, they've travelled all the way. It's a bit out of order to then say, actually, we've got nothing for you. Go home. John Wick says, women's boxing seems to have taken a bit of a dip. Not enough big characters floating around at the moment. It needs a shake-up. I think the sport as a whole has gravitated towards Riyadh season, hasn't it? And while there have been female fights, or at least one female fight on the shows out there, the main focus has been the men and particularly the heavyweight division. So I think that's had an impact as well. But I would say that's an opportunity to promote more female fights and female events in the UK, which I'm guessing is what boxers are trying to do here. So there's nothing wrong with the enterprise. It just seems like the execution may have some issues. Where are we? Jay Jones says, women's boxing was never really good. Take. Only a handful of world-class fighters at all weights, just not enough depth. I mean, that's true. And can be really boring. Eddie started shoving it down our throats since Katie Taylor. I've seen some excellent female fights, though. You know, just recently, Ellie Scotty against Mia Motu. That was a really good fight in Nottingham. So, I mean, it's not that it can't be exciting and competitive. It's just, as you say, there isn't the depth that there is in the men's side. Donna Corby, friend of the show, says, Ayman in need of a haircut. And then he follows up, just in case you didn't get the message, Ayman, badly in need.
Donna Corby, as I put down further in the chat, is in need of a hat. Badly in need of a hat.
Oof, it's going off. This is high-level trash talk here. David Dack says, in my opinion, Sky will cut ties with Boxer. We shall see. Thunder Road says, Ben Shalom must be on a shoestring budget to invite Boxer to a press conference and then cancel on them when they're already physically there. Well, maybe that means technically he doesn't have to pay for their travel. I'm not sure. I'm kidding. Jay Jones says, Sky need to call it a day with boxing like HBO and other broadcasters. They had a good run. The zone are way too big now, especially after the Queensberry link-up. Stephen says, Ben Shalom's treatment of Fran Lomachenko and Savannah Fury needs to be sorted out and taken to the court of arbitration. Okay. DB Cooper 1 says, I think Sky keeps Shalom. The stable domestic options aren't too bad, and what Matchroom versus what Matchroom offers. And now they're in the circle with Turkey. It helps. They're not frozen out. Stephen says, up in the EIS, the therapeutic usage exemption certificates are cheaper than a can of Coke nowadays. DB Cooper 1 says, I was stood outside Tesco's the other day. Some bloke called Josh Hart tried selling me an 80-inch TV fresh off the back of a lorry. To be fair, both Josh and Hart are very common names. Thunder Road says, can we end this SO Live on a sad note, paying respects to Northern Irish boxer John Cooney, RIP? Obviously, this was going to be mentioned before the end of the show. Very sad news that around a week after his fight, John Cooney, boxer from Belfast, I believe, sadly lost his life. A lot of people have been talking, I was talking to someone about this yesterday. A lot of people have taken an opportunity now on social media to say, well, this is a wake-up call about the dangers of boxing. While it's incredibly sad and tragic what's happened to John Cooney, it's not the first time, and I hate to say it, it won't be the last. Boxers make a decision. It's a very brave decision, and sometimes they haven't got many other options on the table, but it is ultimately individual decision to go into the ring and to risk their lives. And I think if people are out there saying, well, yeah, but it's a wake-up call to trolls on social media for, you know, mocking boxers, abusing boxers when they do put their lives on the line in a way that not every other job does, then I completely understand that. But to say it's now and to be used as a tool to beat boxing as a whole with and to talk about banning the sport, the way I've always justified it to myself, and covering boxing for nearly 20 years now, I've always been well aware of the risks, is that boxing does far more good than it does harm. And that's not belittling any of the tragedies that have occurred, including the most recent one with John Cooney, of course. But he was living his dream. And although no one would have wanted that dream to end the way it did, boxing saves a lot of people from a life that would have been much worse than it became through the ring, even if it's just through the training, sometimes just through the amateurs and not even going pro. So I really don't want people who are anti-boxing or anti-combat sports in general to use this as a tool, because I think John Cooney deserves far more than that, and his family deserve more than that. But yeah, Ayman, anything to say on John Cooney's tragic passing?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it on the head, Danny. Of course, SecondsOut offers its condolences to John Cooney's family and everyone affected by it. Like you mentioned there, it's a sad and heavy reminder of just the brutal side of the sport and the risks that boxing brings every time fighters put on the gloves across the UK and worldwide. But like you mentioned there, it does do a lot more than bad boxing, I guess, on a whole. And I think the thing not to lose sight of, like you mentioned, there was a fighter living his dream, and hopefully that can be remembered.
Yeah, I think that's very poignant and a good way to end this week's episode. Well, thank you all for... Oh, actually, no, we haven't done the poll results. Whew, nearly made it out without doing it. Mod Father Frank, if you can hear us, if you've stuck with us for an hour and 25 minutes or hour and 20 minutes, if before anyone says it, because we did start late, please do put up the results of the poll so we can let everyone know. Just read a couple of these chats while we're waiting. RIP John Cooney from Jay Jones. Big Boy Garms. Boxing is not a joke, regardless of women and YouTubers trying to make it look so. It's a bit unfair on the women, generally. Life is on the line every time. So we asked you at the start of the show, what's the best fight announced on Frank Warren's schedule today? We gave you 3 options and an other. Please comment. Now, I know 11% of you voted for other. No one actually put that in the chat of which other fight they were talking about, which is not helpful. But Lee McGregor against Nate Collins or Nathaniel Collins got 12%. Anthony Kakachi against Lee Wood, 22%. And by far, the most attractive fight for the people in the chat that was announced today, Dillian Whyte against Joe Joyce, 53% of the vote. So clearly a market for it, which I'm sure will please Frank Warren, my good friend and Hall of Fame promoter, no end. Talking of no end, we are actually at the end of this week's episode, but do appreciate you all tuning in. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. Give us a thumbs up if you haven't. And if you're watching on playback rather than live, please do put in your questions and comments, and we will still respond to some of those. But until then, we'll be back next week. Ayman, as usual, you get the closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for listening, tuning in, liking, subscribing, and contributing in the chat. I'll be out in the field from Wednesday covering all the action from Jack Catchwell versus Arnold Barboza Jr. cross-promotional fight in itself between Matchroom and Golden Boy. And of course, across any other announcements that make its way and break through in the world of boxing, I'll be there to sure. And Seconds Out, of course, will be there covering any of those developments. As we look forward to in less than, 14 days time, a few days, a week or 2 away from the big one, Batobia versus Bivol 2 and Daniel Dubois defending his heavyweight crown against Joe Parker. That's fast approaching, 1 weekend away, but we've got a lot of boxing to look forward to in the meantime. So thank you for tuning in to Seconds Out. We'll see you guys. Thank you to Frank as well in the hot seat, replacing Vinny, and welcome back to Danny as well from his week off too.
Love it.
Pose there from Danny. But yeah, most importantly, thank you to everyone listening in. We'll catch you guys on the next one.